There is a particular kind of pain that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't arrive with the sharp immediacy of the original wound. It settles in quietly, persistently, like a low hum beneath the surface of your daily life, and it is, in many ways, more damaging than what was done to you in the first place. It is the pain of what you continue to do to yourself after the fact. The scene you replay in your mind at 2 in the morning, dissecting every word, every gesture, every moment where things might have gone differently. The quiet, merciless commentary you direct at yourself, the whispered accusations that somehow, in some way, this was your fault, your failure, your inadequacy made visible. The anger you swallow every morning like a bitter drink you've convinced yourself you need, even as it corrodes something in you that was never meant to corrode. We talk a great deal, in our culture, about what other people do to us. We talk far less about what we do to ourselves in the aftermath, the ways in which we become, without quite realizing it, both the wound and the hand that keeps it opened. At some point, simply continuing to move, putting one foot in front of the other, performing the rituals of daily life is no longer enough. There comes a moment when something more is required. The willingness to sit with yourself, honestly and without distraction, and to face a truth that is uncomfortable but ultimately liberating. Holding on to resentment does not deliver justice. It does not reach the person who hurt you. It does not rewrite what happened or restore what was lost. What it does with quiet, reliable efficiency is transfer a burden onto your shoulders that was never yours to carry. You become the custodian of a weight that belongs to a story that is already over, paid for by the only currency you actually have, your present life, your present energy, your present capacity for joy. The wisest response to being hurt by another person is not to forget what happened, and it is not to excuse it. It is something more sophisticated and more demanding than either of those. It is to respond from a more mature place within yourself, to reclaim your own center, not for their sake, but for yours. That is what this exploration is about. 5 pathways, each one a doorway back to yourself, that will give you not just advice, but a genuine map to the inner resources you already possess. If this kind of content speaks to something in you, if you've been waiting for a conversation that goes beneath the surface and takes your inner life, seriously consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps this work reach the people who need it most, and it tells us that this is the kind of depth you want more of. Now, let us begin. 1. The power of conscious silence. When we are wounded, the psyche's first instinct is entirely understandable. It wants to defend itself, to strike back with equal force, to explain, to justify, to make absolutely certain that the other person understands what they did and what it cost. These impulses arise from a place of genuine pain, and they deserve to be acknowledged as such. They are not weaknesses. They are the natural responses of a self that has been threatened and is attempting to restore its sense of safety and dignity. But here is what experience and a great deal of psychological wisdom teaches us about these impulses. Acting on them rarely produces what we actually need. The sharp retort that felt so satisfying in imagination lands differently in reality. The explanation, offered to someone who is not truly listening, dissipates into the air without leaving any mark on its intended recipient. The attempt to match their energy, to meet their aggression with aggression, or their coldness with coldness, draws you into a game that was designed by rules that do not serve you. Not every provocation deserves your energy. This is not a passive observation. It is one of the most active and demanding choices available to a human being. Conscious silence, and the word conscious here is crucial, because this is not the silence of suppression or defeat, is the decision to withdraw from an exchange that cannot serve your highest interests. It is the recognition that your inner life is worth protecting, that your emotional resources are finite and valuable, that the preservation of your own dignity is more important than the satisfaction of any momentary reactive impulse. There is something that those who have mastered this practice understand, which those who have not yet learned it find almost impossible to believe. The person who attempts to provoke you and fails, who throws the hook into the water and finds that you are simply not biting, is left in a position of profound discomfort, because provocation requires a response to complete itself. It is a loop that needs your participation to close. When you decline to participate, the loop remains open and the energy of the provocation has nowhere to go but back to its source. You have not surrendered. You have not conceded anything. You have simply refused to grant them the power over your emotional state that they were attempting to claim. No one has genuine power over you that you have not. in some way, permitted. This is a radical statement, and it deserves to be examined carefully, rather than simply accepted or rejected. But sit with it for a moment. Consider the last time someone succeeded in destabilizing you, in pulling you out of your own center and into a reactive state you didn't choose. What was the mechanism? Almost always, it was something you gave them: your attention, your emotional engagement, your willingness to treat their provocation as something that required a response. Conscious silence withdraws that gift, and in doing so, it returns something to you that is far more valuable than whatever momentary satisfaction reaction might have offered. The quiet, unassailable dignity of a person who knows who they are and cannot be moved from that knowledge by someone else's attempt to define them. 2. Releasing the need to be predictable. There is a dynamic that develops in relationships, all kinds of relationships, not only romantic ones, that is so gradual in its formation that most people don't notice it until it has already shaped the entire architecture of the connection. It is the dynamic of being taken for granted. It begins, often, with the qualities that are genuinely admirable in you: your reliability, your generosity, your willingness to accommodate, to adapt, to put others' needs alongside or even ahead of your own. These are not flaws. In the right relational soil, they are the foundations of genuine intimacy and trust. But there is a shadow side to these qualities that is worth understanding clearly. When you are always available, always accommodating, always willing to say yes when your response to any request is entirely predictable before the request is even mad, something begins to shift in how others relate to you. Not necessarily through any conscious or deliberate process on their part, but through the simple human tendency to stop noticing what is always there. Familiarity, in this sense, does not simply breed contempt, it breeds invisibility. The person who is always present, always giving, always reliable, becomes, in the perceptual landscape of those around them, a feature of the environment rather than a choice that could be made differently. Your presence stops being something they actively appreciate and starts being something they simply assume. Breaking this pattern is not selfishness. It requires a degree of courage that is often underestimated because it means disrupting a dynamic that, however imbalanced, has become comfortable and familiar. It means accepting the discomfort of being temporarily misunderstood, perhaps even accused of coldness or withdrawal, in service of something more important, the restoration of genuine reciprocity. When you become less immediately available, not as a manipulation tactic, not to punish anyone, but as an honest expression of your own needs and limits, you create something that the relational psychologists call meaningful absence, a space in which the other person is invited, perhaps for the first time in a long time, to notice what your presence actually means, to feel, in a way that constant availability made impossible, what it would actually be like if you were not there. This is not cruelty, it is honesty. It is the refusal to participate in a fiction that serves no one, not even the person who benefits from your predictability. Because a relationship built on someone's inability to say no is not a relationship built on genuine connection. It is built on habit, on convenience, on the comfortable assumption that certain things will always be available, regardless of whether they are truly valued. Reclaiming your own rhythm, choosing when to be present and when to step back, based on your genuine assessment of what serves you, and the relationship is one of the quietest and most powerful acts of self-restoration available to you. It requires no announcement and no confrontation. It simply requires that you begin, one decision at a time, to let your availability reflect your actual choices rather than your fear of disappointing others. 3. Liberating yourself from the need to explain. Of all the emotional habits that keep us tethered to painful dynamics long after we have, in principle, decided to move on, the compulsion to explain ourselves is among the most persistent and the most draining. You know this compulsion well, even if you haven't named it. It is the impulse, when you set a limit or make a decision that someone else doesn't approve of, to immediately begin justifying it, to provide the reasons, the context, the careful step-by-step account of how you arrived at this position, in the hope that if you can only explain it clearly enough, the other person will finally understand, and in understanding, will grant you the approval you need to feel that your decision is legitimate. There is something deeply revealing in this pattern, and it is worth looking at directly. The need to explain compulsively, repeatedly, to people who have already shown that they are not truly listening is not primarily about communication. It is about approval. It is the unconscious belief that your decisions, your boundaries, your choices about how to live your own life, require external validation to be real. That without someone else's agreement, you cannot quite trust your own judgment. This belief is worth examining, because it is costing you something significant. Every time you offer elaborate explanations to someone who has demonstrated that they are not genuinely interested in understanding you, you are investing precious emotional energy in a transaction that will not pay off. You are, as one way of putting it, shouting into the wind and hoping it will hold you. Words do not reach those who have chosen not to hear them. This is not a pessimistic statement, it is simply an accurate observation about the nature of genuine communication, which requires both a sender and a receiver who is actually present and open. When that second condition is absent, the most eloquent explanation in the world will not bridge the gap, because the gap is not about information. It is about willingness. Your decisions have inherent legitimacy that does not depend on anyone else's approval. The boundary you set, even if no one around you understands why you set it, is valid. The distance you have chosen to create, even if the person on the other side interprets it uncharitably, is yours to choose. The silence you have decided to maintain, even if it is misread as coldness or indifference, is a legitimate response to a situation that no longer serves you. There is a particular group of people who have forfeited their claim on your explanations, and this is worth saying clearly, even if it sounds harder than you are comfortable with. Those who were not present in your most difficult moments, who are nowhere to be found when you most needed someone to show up, have not earned the right to a detailed account of why you are now creating distance. Their curiosity about your choices, however genuine it may be, does not obligate you to provide answers. Silence, in this context, is not rudeness. It is not passive aggression. It is simply the natural consequence of a relationship that did not offer reciprocity when it mattered most. For escaping the prison of the past, the mind has a remarkable and deeply unhelpful capacity to return, again and again, to the scenes it has not finished processing. The conversation that ended badly, the moment when you saw clearly what someone was willing to do, the words that landed with a precision that surprised even the person who said them, the silence that followed something that deserved a response. These scenes replay not because your mind is punishing you, though it can certainly feel that way, but because something in the psyche is genuinely trying to complete an experience that was not fully integrated when it occurred. There is an intelligence in this repetition, even if the repetition itself has long since passed the point of usefulness and entered the territory of pure suffering. The crucial distinction, and this is one of the most important things you can take from this entire conversation, is between the past as a place you learn from and the past as a place you live in. The first relationship to the past is healthy and necessary. Every significant experience, including and perhaps especially the painful ones, contains information that is genuinely relevant to how you move forward. Extracting that information, understanding what happened, what your part in it was, what you would do differently, what this experience has taught you about your own values and limits, is not dwelling. It is wisdom. Living in the past is something different. It is when the mind returns, not to learn but simply to rehearse, to relive the pain with no new insight, to replay the injustice with no movement toward resolution, to remain in a scene that is over, as though staying in it long enough might somehow change its outcome. Nothing in the present moment is altered by your continued residence in a past that cannot be changed. The person who hurt you is not affected by your midnight replays of what they did. The injustice is not corrected by your ongoing grief about it. What is affected, what is quietly, steadily diminished by this process, is your present life, your capacity to be here, now, in the actual experience of your actual days, rather than perpetually elsewhere, in a scene that has already ended. Real transformation, the kind that is durable and genuine, rather than simply a performance of having moved on, does not come from denial. It does not come from pretending that what happened didn't hurt, or constructing a story in which you were unaffected. It comes from a decision that is simple to state and genuinely difficult to make. I will no longer allow this wound to be the primary lens through which I see myself and my life. Not, this didn't happen. Not, I wasn't hurt. But, I was hurt. And I have learned what this experience had to teach me, and I am no longer willing to be defined by it. I am more than this story, and my future will be built not from the rubble of what happened, but from the clarity and the strength and the self-knowledge that survived it. That decision made not once but repeatedly, every time the mind attempts to pull you back into the old scene, is the foundation of genuine freedom. 5. Returning to your own center and to life. There is a form of waiting that masquerades as patience but is actually a kind of self-imprisonment. It is the waiting for the person who hurt you to come back and make it right, to apologize, to finally understand what they did and what it cost, to acknowledge, in some form that feels adequate, the reality of your experience. This waiting is understandable. The desire for acknowledgement for the person who caused harm, to recognize that harm is not petty or vindictive. It is a deeply human longing for something that feels like basic fairness, that reality be seen clearly, that our experience be validated by the person whose actions shaped it. But here is the hard truth that genuine healing requires us to face. Your peace of mind cannot be held hostage to another person's willingness to grow. Your freedom cannot be conditional on their capacity for accountability. Your life cannot be put on hold while you wait for a reckoning that may never come, and that, even if it did come, would not give you back what you spent waiting for it. You do not need them to understand you in order to understand yourself. You do not need their acknowledgement to know what happened and what it meant. You do not need their apology to begin the work of healing, because that work is yours to do, with or without their participation, and it is available to you right now, in this moment, regardless of what they choose to do or not do. The deepest healing is always an inside job. It happens not when the external situation finally resolves in the way you hoped, but when you make the internal decision to stop organizing your well-being around an outcome that is outside your control, when you turn your attention from what they owe you to what you owe yourself, when the energy that has been directed outward toward the hope of justice, the anticipation of acknowledgement, the monitoring of whether they have finally understood is redirected inward toward the steady, patient construction of a life that genuinely reflects who you are and what you value. This is not resignation. It is not giving up on fairness or pretending that what happened was acceptable. It is the recognition that your life, this irreplaceable, unrepeatable life, is happening right now, while you wait, and every moment spent waiting for someone else to give you permission to be okay, is a moment of your actual life that passes unused. The more consistently you choose yourself, the more you act from your own values, honor your own needs, and direct your own energy toward what genuinely matters to you, the more naturally respect tends to follow. Not as a guaranteed outcome, because nothing in human relationships is guaranteed, but as the natural result of presenting yourself to the world as someone who takes their own inner life seriously enough to protect it. No wound is permanent unless you make it your permanent residence. Every scar contains within it the record, not just of what broke, but of what healed. And the fact that you are here, engaging with these ideas, willing to look honestly at what has happened and what it has cost you, that is already evidence of something that the wound could not destroy. Your capacity to reflect, your willingness to grow, your refusal, however tentative or hard one, to let what was done to you become the final word on who you are. We have traveled through 5 territories today, 5 dimensions of the inner work that genuine healing requires: conscious silence and the dignity it protects, the courage to release predictability and reclaim your own rhythm, the freedom that comes from no longer needing to explain yourself to those who have chosen not to truly listen, the decision to stop living in the past and begin building something new from where you actually stand, and the deepest freedom of all, the return to your own center, independent of whether anyone else ever acknowledges what you went through. None of this is easy. If it were easy, it would not be the work that transforms. But it is available. It is available to you right now, not when the situation resolves, not when they come back and apologize, not when enough time has passed, but now, in the quality of the next choice you make about where to direct your attention and your energy. You were hurt. That is real, and it deserves to be honored. But you are not only the person who was hurt, you are also the person who is here, now, willing to look at that hurt clearly and ask what it has to teach. That willingness, that refusal to let the wound be the whole story, is where reclamation begins. The center you are returning to was never lost. It was waiting. It has always been waiting, and it is yours. Come home to yourself. That is where everything worth building begins.